Hey everyone, this is Megan Hillier from Know Your Ancestors, and you're listening to the Know Your Ancestors podcast. Many of us have an innate desire to understand our roots, to know where we come from, and to understand the lives of our ancestors. On the show, I sit down with content creators and entrepreneurs to share some of the stories that I've uncovered and compiled about their own ancestors. Watch and listen as we discuss the traumatic and life-changing events of their close ancestors that helped shape who these guests are today. Welcome to the podcast today. I am sitting here with Dee Taggart, and I am excited to talk to her to be able to share the stories of some of her ancestors with her. But before we get into that, I just want Dee can you just introduce yourself? Let us know a bit about you, your work, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just grateful you reached out because I love this kind of stuff. I do a lot of spiritual work through breath work and different modalities and cranial sacral therapy. And so you don't realize like how real ancestry is. And so when you reached out to me, I was super excited because I've actually been diving into this a little bit and we can obviously talk more on that. But I am a breathwork facilitator. I love doing breathwork. I'm getting certified in intuitive cranial sacral therapy, which is another modality that I'm passionate about. I am just fascinated by the body and spirituality and how the body, mind, and spirit all works together. And women specifically, the divine feminine. So I started a group called Her Expansion, and it's basically a community where women come together to expand all areas of their life, their knowledge, their confidence, their community, their connections, and their consciousness. And I do obviously a lot of different things, being a mother and being a wife and working a business and working in all kinds of different aspects of my life. But what I'm most passionate about is just how the mind, body, and spirit all works together and how we work through different traumas and different things that can help us grow and progress here on this earth. I call myself a student of the earth. And so I'm always open to learning and I'm always open to just discovering everything at its fullest.
That's amazing. So how did you kind of get into that sort of thing? Was there like a point in your life where you felt like you needed that? Like, is that kind of what drew you to it, or have you always
Great
been?
question. Yeah, so I went through a divorce. I grew up with a really great family. Like I had a really good upbringing, and I'm super grateful and fortunate for that. But when I got married, I thought it was, you get married and live happily ever after. And I really realized like you come together with a lot of differences and you grow. And if one person doesn't want to grow and the other does, it makes it really hard. But what I discovered is that I was so dependent on that relationship and not dependent on myself. And so when I started down this path of progression, I realized that a lot of what it had to do with everything was me. And it was a complete shock to me. But I was awakened, I call it, because I think so many of us are asleep to even connecting on that level. And I was awakened by the gift of Christ and by God's grace. And so I'm really passionate about that because that's what truly transformed me. But I started with fitness. I started with health and fitness and just understanding how to take care of my body better because I was in a state where I was really uncomfortable in my own skin. I was not feeling good. I was very depressed. I had a really hard time even just getting out of bed or being motivated to do anything. I had just kind of given up on life. And I went through a divorce. And so that was really hard. And originally I kind of played victim. I blamed everybody and I blamed the spouse and and I realized that I needed to take accountability for my own life. And so I was awakened and that's pretty much where it started, fitness. And then I started a women's group and started grounding and holding space for breath work. And that's when I discovered that I have some spiritual gifts that I'm passionate about and started digging into that and how the breath is powerful and how you can move energy and move emotion through your body and out of your body. And you can connect with your emotions and your feelings and you can better understand yourself. And so now I'm a passionate advocate of self-discovery.
Mm, wow. Yeah, and I think often those hard things are what trigger that discovery. We have hard things happen in our life. You realize, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to be a victim the rest of my life. I want to take some control. So I think that's amazing that you did that and that you found that healing through Christ and through connecting with your body and yourself and understanding yourself better. I think that's a powerful thing when we realize that we actually do have control over
Yeah.
what we do with ourselves. Like we have control over our body and what we put into it and what we how we treat it and all of those things and how that can be a really healing thing.
That was my greatest awakening is wait, we're connected and we're in control of everything, every action we do, everything we put out, everything we take in. We are in control of that. And more importantly, our spirit. Our spirit knows what's best for us, but sometimes we get so distracted in this world because it's so crazy and it's so full of so many things. And just understanding that opposition is what strengthens you and is what actually gives you the growth. It's the most beautiful thing because without any of that opposition, we would be really boring people. Opposition is what like allows for the story to triumph through. It allows for the change to happen, transformation to happen. And transformation, I think, is the most beautiful thing ever. I am so passionate about the butterfly. It goes from this little caterpillar on the ground and then it turns into something so beautiful. And I think that is the journey of us and our spiritual progression. And so, yeah, I totally agree. When you go through hardships, it brings out the best in you, even when it's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about some of your female ancestors, and they, from what I was able to find, they did have hard things happen in their lives, and made beautiful things out of it. So when we first talked, you said that you were curious about learning about your grandmother, Virginia Lee Gibbs. Can you talk a bit about like why you were drawn to her or why you wanted to learn about her?
Yeah, so actually the reason it's so cool, the divine timing and everything. The reason that I was drawn to her is I recently did a healing session and she came to me and I don't even know her and my mom doesn't even know her because she passed away when my mom was super little. I think my mom was about 3 years old. And so we don't really know a ton about her. And when I was doing this healing session, I felt her presence so strongly and she just came and showered me with love. And I
Mm,
guess the whole premise of it was that she struggled with self-love. And it's something that I've struggled with, loving myself and understanding why don't I love myself? I have everything to love about myself. Why? And so she showered me with this love. And I thought that was so interesting. I'm like, that couldn't have been, I don't even know her. I don't even think about her.
mm,
Like, that couldn't have been her. Like, am I going crazy? And then literally 2 weeks later, you reach out and you're like, hey,
mm,
do you want to dive into some ancestry? And I feel like it's her inkling of just like, hey, I want to get to know you better. I want to help you with this generational trauma. And I didn't even know that was really a thing. I've always known that, yes, we have DNA encoded and we have certain genetics that are passed down, but I didn't know that it is like directly chained and linked to us. And
mhm,
so, and then you reached out. And so I got super curious and I asked my mom and she's like, well, I know a few things, but I only know a few things from her mom. And so she couldn't give me a lot of information. And then when you reached out, I was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity
mm.
for me to dive
Wow.
deeper because I haven't done much genealogy personally. I
Hmm.
haven't passed digging at all. So I'm excited
Hmm.
to dive into this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like I've had points in my life where there's an ancestor that I feel close to and I've like learned their story. And I think there are those times when, like you, we can feel their presence there. We can recognize who they are even and that they want us to connect to them. So I'm excited to share with you. Let me just get my screen up here. I'm excited to share with you some of her. So can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So because she was born relatively recently, like she was born in 1929, it's a little difficult to find many records just due to like privacy laws and all of that. So I wanted to share some about her mother and also her grandmother. So we're going to kind of learn about all three of them there. So your second great grandmother was born in 1876 in Kentucky. Her name was Llewellyn Pearl Neely, and her father was a farm laborer near Elkton, Todd County, Kentucky. So just kind of in the middle, well, little southwest Kentucky there. And by 1900, Can you see that picture there? It's like not loading on mine, but maybe on yours it's fine.
Yeah. Is this a bunch of signatures I see here?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Okay, so by 1900, your second great grandmother was living in Webb City, Missouri, with her parents and some siblings. So she had been married in 1896, but in this census in 1900, she's living with her parents. So you can see Pearl Taylor here, and then her mother. So James and Ellen Neely were her parents. So she's living with her parents, but she's married and has one daughter here, May Taylor. They listed it as grandson, but she was actually a granddaughter. So by 1900, her family had moved to Missouri, to Webb City, Missouri. So she was married. So Pearl was married at that time in 1900. She had been married for 4 years. That's what's written here, this number 4 here. So she had been married for 4 years. They had one child born and one child still living. So just this one daughter there. So I wondered, like, why was she not living with her husband? Where was her husband at this time? And I found him on that same census in 1900, and he's living with his parents. So here's Frank Taylor, was her husband, living with his parents. He's listed as single, but I'm like 95% sure that that's him because it's the only one in that area, and he's the same age and same parents and everything. Sometimes they just recorded things incorrectly, but for whatever reason, he was living with his parents. And I thought it was interesting that his occupation here is listed as, can you read what that says?
Is that gambler?
Yeah. So his occupation was gambler. I'm like, huh,
Oh my
okay. That's
God.
kind of weird that they would list that as an occupation. His brother, you can see, was a fireman, and his older brother was a carpenter, and his dad was a carpenter, and then his younger brother says baseball player. So they had quite an array of occupations in their family, but I thought gambler, that's a little interesting. So I'm not sure what the situation was. Maybe that gambler occupation caused some tension in the marriage, and so they were living separately at that time. I'm not totally sure, but they were both living there in 1900 in Webb City, Missouri. So these are the two addresses that they were living at. Pearl was living down here, and then Frank was living up here on North Hall Street. So they were living about a mile apart, and they had one daughter.
Wow.
So so then by 1910, so every 10 years there's a census record taken where it tells all the people that are living in the United States. So it's a great way to see, where the people were, what their occupations were, and everything. So by 1910, they had 4 children. So you can see his first name was Siebert, like Siebert, Frank.
Mm.
So sometimes he is written as Siebert F or just Frank. And then her first name was Llewellyn, and then Pearl was her second name. So we see them here with 4 children in 1910. And Frank was now a jigman at a zinc mine, which I looked up what a jigman is, and I think they made kind of the tools and worked on the tools that would be
Or-
used in the mine. So
Oh, wow.
so they were renting a home and in Webb City, Missouri. And then your great grandmother Mary, so your grandmother Virginia's mom, was born just a few months later in October of the same year. So this is her parents and older siblings before she was born later that year.
Wow.
So here's a sign up in the Webb City where they were living. It was called the Zinc City. So there's a bunch of zinc mines in the area. This is taken in 1909, so just the year before your great grandmother was born. I thought that was interesting there.
Is mine. Wow.
Yeah. So this is about where Webb City is. So just south of Kansas City in Missouri, just really close to the Oklahoma border there, just to get an idea of where that is. So then by 1920, you can see your great grandmother Mary is here. She's 9 years old, and her father, Frank, and Pearl, her mother. By then, Frank was now a mill boss at the zinc mine, so he had moved up a bit. And there was 4 other siblings here. She did have a couple older siblings that had moved out by then. And they were living in Webb City on 625 Null Street. So then about 4 months later, I don't know if you can see this very well, but this is the death record of Mary's father, Frank. So he passed away just a few months after that census was taken in 1920. Of the cause of death was pulmonary TB, so like tuberculosis, an infection in his lungs, which maybe that was connected to working in the zinc mine. I'm not sure, but he was 49 years old, and your grandmother, your great grandmother Mary, was 9 years old when he passed away. So now Pearl, your second great grandmother, was left with 6 children. 5 were still living at home, aged seven to 16. So I'm sure that was a hard time in the 1920s in South Missouri. It's probably a hard time having all those young kids and no husband. So now 10 years later, we can see that Mary's mother Pearl here was renting a home for $11 a month. That's what this 11 means there. And she had her 27-year-old daughter Glenna and 17-year-old son Paul were living with her, and also this granddaughter June Smith. So I'm not sure whose daughter this is. Probably Glenna's daughter. She was single, but had a daughter named June Smith, I'm assuming, unless it's a granddaughter from another another child. I didn't spend time looking at that, but her occupation was listed as home laundry. So Pearl, your second great grandmother, was doing laundry for other people, likely to make ends meet. She was listed as being a widow. Here's the widow, and she was 20 years old when she had gotten married 33 years earlier. And this was that house that she was living in. So this is the home they were living in that 1930 census, or 1930 census. So it was built in 1905. This little sunroom was probably built on later, I'm guessing, and it was about 1,100 square feet. So just a small little house there that they were living in.
Wow.
Yeah. So here we'll pause there for a second. So how are you feeling as you're learning a little bit more about so this is your second great grandmother,
It's
and
fascinating. Like,
yeah.
very interesting. Yeah, I recently had a experience with my brother. He's a gambler, and I recently had an experience with him trying to help him kind of work through this, and he said that he's like it's been my grandpa struggled with it. It's been passed down to me. So I think that it's interesting that some of the things you might have done or your ancestors might have done definitely have a play on how you show up, because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously you're from them and it's coded in you. And when you're born of them, it's still something you could struggle with. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
something that was brought to my attention. I was interesting. My brother struggles with that. And here it is, his great grandfather as well, great great
Mm-hmm.
grandfather was a
Mm-hmm.
gambler. So I'm
Yeah.
like, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
I thought it was curious that they even put it in the census. Like, I've never seen that listed as an
As an
occupation.
occupation. Yeah.
Maybe it was almost out of spite or something. I don't,
Yeah.
but just
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sure there's some stories there that we can't quite uncover, but we can see some clues of, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So then let's go here. So 2 years before that, on September 22nd, 1928, your great grandmother, Mary Taylor, so their daughter, married Porter, and I'm not even sure how to say his middle names, like Girain, I don't know, Gibbs. Okay, and they were married in St. Louis. So this is your great grandmother, Mary. Okay, so she was 17 when they got married. She was just 2 weeks shy of turning 18, and Porter was almost 24. So you can see Porter and then Mary Taylor here, and they got married in St. Louis, just by the Justice of the Peace is where they got married. So then in the newspaper, you can see they just put in like who obtained a marriage license that week. So we have Porter, Gibbs, and Mary Taylor, and they were living at 34, is that 34? Yeah, 3435A Missouri Street in the St. Louis. So this is that address here. So they were likely living in an apartment here. It looks like there could have been some apartment complexes in there. So that's where they were living when they got married.
Wow.
So then a couple years later in 1930, they were living on Page Boulevard in St. Louis. And there were three other families listed at the same address that they were living at. So another probably apartment building. And they were renting their home for $24 a month. Porter was listed as being a chauffeur. Not sure if you can read that there, for a wholesale business. I'm not sure what sort of business that was. So then your grandmother, Virginia L, is what's listed here. Virginia Lee was 9 months old. So it's 9 out of 12. So 9 months old is listed there. So this is where their address would have been, this empty spot here. So I don't know if their house burned down or got torn down, but they would have been living on this street. So it's probably similar to these two houses on either side of theirs. There was a few other households living in that house. So I'm assuming they had, a little apartment in there somewhere. So then in 1932, your great grandfather, Porter Gibbs, enlisted in the National Guard. So he had enlisted before he'd gotten married almost 10 years earlier for 3 years. So he was familiar with being in the National Guard. So in 1932, he enlisted again for a 3 year, it says for a period of 3 years here. You can see his occupation was chauffeur and that he's been a chauffeur for 8 years. And it says he's married and has one child, and two persons are dependent on him. So his wife and child were dependent on him. So he enlisted when your grandmother was about 3 years old. So I'm not sure with the National Guard if I think they just go away for training. Everyone, like, I'm not sure if don't think they're gone like all the time, but that was kind of interesting to see. So then we don't have much to see until 1940. In 1940, that 1940 census, your great grandmother Mary, so Mary Gibbs here, and your grandmother Virginia Gibbs, they moved to California. So here they were living with Mary's brother Norval Paul Taylor and Pearl Taylor, so Mary's mother. And they were living in Glendale, California, which is just North Los Angeles. You can see that Mary was a waitress at a drugstore. Didn't know they had waitresses at drugstores, but I guess they did. And you can see that Pearl was a widow, was 62 years old. Virginia was 10 years old. And her mother was still listed as married here, but it looks like it kind of has a line crossed down with a question mark, maybe. And she was 29 years old. So it did say how much she made as a waitress. It says she made $100 the previous year in 1939, and she just worked 12 weeks out of the last year. So that's about $2,000 today that she would have made the previous year. And it states that they lived in St. Louis in 1935. So they probably they must have moved sometime between 1935 and 1940 to California. So an interesting thing is that Pearl, so your second great grandmother, is also listed on the census back in Missouri. And so I'm not sure if she was just recorded twice. So on this census back in California, her son Norval Paul, this X beside his name, tells that he's the one that provided all the information for the census. And then back in Missouri, Pearl is listed here with living with her mother, and the X is by her name. So I'm not sure if she had been in California visiting for a little bit or if she was going to be moving there. And so he listed her as living there. I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, she was also recorded in Missouri. So I'm not sure about that. But I'm confident that this is her because her maiden name was Neely and her mother's name was Ellen, we have on records, but Tabitha Ellen, and it was like at the same location in Webb City. So unless there's another Pearl Taylor with the same maiden name and age, all of that, I don't know. Anyway, so then for Pearl, by 1950, she was living all on her own. Her occupation was just keeping house, so she likely wasn't working, just living at home. She was a widow, and she was living at 414 South Hall Street, which is this house here that's still standing. She died 5 years later at the age of 79 after being a widow for 35 years. Yeah. So that's kind of where we end with her, learning about her life. What do you think her life was like, She was widowed, had young kids at home, kind of making ends meet, doing laundry for people. How do you think her life was like?
I'm inspired by her perseverance, like making it to 79, but like having so much like responsibility and roles on her shoulders and just like pushing through. It sounds like she was a really good caretaker and like took
Mhm.
care of everybody and really worked hard to make sure that she could look after all her responsibilities, which is inspiring in a way. And I definitely like see that in myself in a lot of ways of taking on responsibility, especially in the roles of raising children and making sure everybody's cared for and watched over and figuring out ways to see if I can help them. And so I
Mhm.
kind of relate to that in a way.
Mhm. Yeah, I almost wonder if she like went with her daughter to California to help move her over there or something to live with her brother. But yeah, it does seem like she was connected to her children still when she was older and a
Yeah.
caretaker, like you say. Yeah. So it was kind of difficult at this point by 1940, 1950 to find many records just due to privacy laws. There's like it's harder to access things. But I was looking for information about your great grandmother, Mary Taylor Gibbs or Mary Ellen Gibbs. So they left Missouri and went to California, right? I first found this record, which I don't know if you can see it very well, but it is a social security index, which matches the information about her. So she's listed as Mary E. Thomas, and then in brackets, Mary Ellen Taylor, has her same birth date in Webb City, Missouri, and her same parents, Frank Taylor and Pearl Neely. And it says that she died on the 2nd of January, 1992, and that her name was listed as Mary E. Thomas. So that kind of led me to think, okay, she must have married again after leaving Missouri, likely divorcing Virginia's father, Porter. I wasn't able to find a divorce record or anything, but I was able to locate, oops, not that other way. I was able to locate this little newspaper clipping for James C. Thomas, age 31, marrying a Mary E. Gibbs, age 32, both of Reno. And so I'm pretty confident that this is her. I did find her also in the 1950 census living with a James Thomas and Mary E. Gibbs that was also born in Missouri, and it just seemed to fit. But I couldn't really find much more out about them. I looked all over for an obituary or something for her. In Family Search, where your family tree is, it says that she passed away in 1995 in Salt Lake, but on this record, it says that she died in 1992. So I looked all over for an obituary, couldn't find anything. So I don't know if your mom knows more about her. I mean, she passed away pretty recently. So maybe you can ask your mom about that and see if she knows more about what happened to her. But, or maybe you know what happened to her.
No,
Do you know?
my mom probably does.
Yeah. 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 So I'm not sure if she did pass away in Salt Lake or anything, but seems like she did remarry, but I'm not sure much more about that. So then here's your grandmother, Virginia Lee Gibbs. So we talked about your second great grandmother, Llewellyn Pearl, and your great grandmother, Mary. And so now we're going to talk a bit more about Virginia. So she had come to California with her mother by 1940 when she was about 10 years old. I was able to find a city directory in Glendale, California, where they had lived, that she was living. So you can see Virginia. This ditto mark is just for Gibbs. She was a stenographer and she was renting at 822 East Wilson Avenue. So it's a really cool house that's still standing there. I'm guessing she rented like a room in this house, but it's actually for sale right now. So you can like see all these pictures of the inside of the house. So in 1948, she was living there as a stenographer. So she got an education and was able to do that. So then by 1950, here she is listed in the census Virginia L. Gibbs, and she was the head of the house. She's 20 years old, and she was living in an apartment and had a lodger, so probably just a roommate there with her. She was a typist for a steamship company and 20 years old. So it says she had never married and was born in Missouri. So that's where this building is here. So she had an apartment in this building here in Glendale, Los Angeles. So then by 1951, here we have another city directory that says that she was in the U.S. Navy. That's what this USN stands for. So she was renting this house on Chevy Chase Drive in Los Angeles, and she was in the Navy by this time in 1951. So around this time in 1952, I found this obituary for Virginia's father, Porter Gibbs. So he died of a heart attack in Texas in 1952, and he was 47 years old. So Virginia would have been 23 years old at this time. And it states here at the bottom, it says, surviving our daughter, Virginia Lee Gibbs of the U.S. Army. It says Army, but she was in the Navy. And then 2 sisters. So it doesn't say anything about Mary. So I'm assuming they did get divorced or at least permanently separated. On his death record here, it was filled out by his sister. And for undermarried or never married, widowed, or divorced, it says DK, which means don't know. So his sister must have not known for sure if he was divorced or what the situation was by that time, or if he had remarried. I'm not sure. But you can see Porter Goreen Gibbs. He died on the September 19th, 1952 in Texas. So.
Wow.
So then I found this little Naval Service Index here for Virginia. So her name is listed as Virginia Lee Sanders, which we know that she married and had your mother. So she died on the 19th of December, 1969. She was in the Navy from February 1951 to August 1952. So just about a year and a half. And that states that she passed away in 1969. So Virginia married Eugene Sanders on June 1st, 1961 in Las Vegas, Nevada. This clipping of their marriage certificate was on Family Search, so your family had that. She's listed as Virginia Lee Smith on the marriage certificate, so she must have married sometime between 1951 when she was in that city directory and 1961 here when she married Eugene Sanders. So Family Search, it does list that there's a Norman Smith that she was married to, but there's not much more information about him. And I trying to find another marriage record for her, but I couldn't find anything. So records just are a little more difficult when it's more recent like that. So she likely married, sometime, and then not sure what happened to that husband, if they were divorced or whatever, and then she remarried in 1961. So we do know that your mother was born in 1966 and that Virginia passed away 3 years later. So a death record could be ordered by family members to find out what her cause of death was, or maybe your family already has one, but I wasn't able to do that. So how are you feeling now that you've learned a bit more about your grandmother, about her mother and her grandmother, kind of your maternal line for 4 generations? How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's just fascinating. Like I really am just like so fascinated by just the personality, the perseverance, the where they moved around. I think learning about my grandma, it's like it sounds like she was like constantly figuring out what to do next, how to like going from typewriter to Navy to it just seems like she was a go-getter. And it's just fascinating to see how dynamic she was and relate that back to me. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not sure if did you know much about her? Like when you talked to your mom about her marriage or anything?
My mom doesn't know a whole ton about her either. So,
Mm-hmm.
because it was so short-lived and my mom was so young when she passed away, I guess
Right.
my didn't talk a lot about her because he got remarried to my
Mm-hmm.
step-grandmother, which I love and adore dearly. I'm super grateful for her. But yeah, there's not a lot there to to discover. And I love this because it does allow you to think deeper about yourself, about your family, about where you came from, and kind of bring that into remembrance. And I think there's power in that.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. So learning about her and, like you said, that she kind of, I feel like she made things work. Like she had to get some sort of an education to be a stenographer and then to join the Navy and then all of that. Like she seemed to have just persevered and made things happen. How do you want to honor her in your own life? Like how are you feeling that you want to kind of connect to her and and keep that connection in your life?
Yeah, I think just acknowledging that the personality traits that I have can correlate to with her, and being grateful for that, like grateful for her ability to persevere, her ability to figure it out, her ability to be dynamic. It relates to me being able to push through and be dynamic and move through as well. And I'm inspired by it. So I can connect to her by just, knowing that I come from a background of hardworking women that have taken on roles and responsibilities to make sure that they're making the best out of life and getting the most opportunities and pushing through and just making sure that they're continuing to progress and to grow and to connect with others. And so that's what I'm passionate about. So it's really cool to correlate the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like you must have a special connection to her. Like you said that you were visited her by her and felt her presence near you. I think our ancestors are near, like they're close. They're here to help us and help us grow and learn. And I think we have these ancestors who have learned lessons in their life and that are continuing to progress after they've passed on, and that their experience and their knowledge can help us in our own situations and our own life and choices and everything. So I think that's a powerful thing that you have that connection to her and that she's there and that she's eager to help you and to guide you and to strengthen you in your life. So is there anything else you wanted to share
No, that's
about
beautiful.
that?
That's very true. Like it's interesting that you realize that they really are there for you, like guardian
Mhm.
angels. Powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dee, for being on the podcast. How can people find you? I know you have a podcast as well, and you're doing
Yes, and
work
you're gonna be
also.
on there talking about how you can expand yourself in all the ways, and especially
Yes.
technology. Uh,
Yes, I'm excited.
yeah, so I am on Instagram, obviously, and that's connected to my Facebook, but I actually don't ever get on Facebook, so don't
Yeah.
count me on there. And then I also have a podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. It's called Her Expansion. It's just ways women are expanding their lives. And Megan will be a guest on there really soon. So you
Yes.
can come and listen to us on there as well.
Yes.
I love to connect and through social. That's my main way of connecting with me.
Awesome. Well, I'll put those links in the show notes, and so go check out Dee and see all the good things that she's doing. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Dee, and we will see you guys later.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for watching or listening to the podcast today. If you want to start learning about your own ancestors, you can get my free mini class called 3 Steps to Start Knowing Your Ancestors. It comes with a workbook. It's super short but has actionable steps that you can take to start knowing your own ancestors. Just go to knowyourancestors.co/3steps or click the link in the show notes to sign up. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you next time.